I come from a remote island called Rendova, located in the Solomon Islands, and have since moved overseas, hence access to the internet. Across from our island is another island called Tetepare. The story of Tetepare is really interesting, because it was abandoned completely by the inhabitants a few centuries ago. Just like the villagers fled the island to come to neighboring islands, such as my own, and here we are a few centuries later. Because of the lack of humans on the island, it is known for its biodiversity, and few researchers come every now and again to have a look. If you're looking for cool remote places to travel after the pandemic, I highly recommend it. The interesting part of Tetepare for me was, why did everyone just leave? If you were a villager back in the day, it would have been a great place to live. Volcanic soil to grow crops, an abundance of fresh water, animals that were easy to hunt. But the official story told is there was a great sick, and people were dropping like flies left and right. So the villagers fled to get away from the sick. However, the island is known for being so very big. Realistically, if you wanted to get away from others, it wouldn't have been too hard, because you could be self-sufficient on other parts of the island. The story told to me growing up is a bit different though. Back in those days, we loved to fight. A war canoe from my island Rendova arrived on Tetepare to fight. However, upon arrival, they were met with numerous unburied dead bodies. All the large canoes that belonged to the Tetepare people were gone. To leave so hastily and not even bury your dead was a really weird thing, because it was back in the days where they first thought that spirits had done this to these people. However, the people from Rendova decided to set up villages against their better judgment. In due time, they also fled because the spirits that had decimated the population of Tetepare apparently attacked the newly set up villages there. Ever since, the island has continued to remain uninhabited, except for a few of the eco-lodges that tourists come and visit now and again. Now in present day, we go to Tetepare to maybe have a picnic or go hunting. We are, however, extremely cautious, because it is believed the island is still extremely wild, and because of the lack of humans, spirits run amok on the island. I have some weird stories about going hunting there too, and I think it's time to tell you them. The island is said to be wild because no churches have been built on it yet. For this reason, it is alleged that spirits still roam free. Ever since I was small, we went hunting on Tetepare. They have an issue with wild boars destroying their natural habitat, so hunting is encouraged, and as a result of chasing boars around the island, I have a pretty good knowledge of knowing where things are. A few years ago when I was younger, while we were hunting, we decided to go visit our other relatives at the Eco Lodge. Recommend visiting if you want a unique experience. There was a researcher who wanted to have a look at unique flora and fauna, and since I was the only one who spoke English somewhat fluently, I volunteered to take him. We explored the island quite extensively. The thing is, we know that when we're hunting, we don't go deep into the rainforest, because you may not come out. Simply because of its density, but also because there have been stories of other things. Anyway, I was taking this researcher around and he had a navigational piece of equipment. He was using it to see where we were going. The day was coming to an end, and I wanted to return to the Eco Lodge because I didn't want to be camping in the middle of the night without shelter. The way we normally do things is come back out of the rainforest towards the coast, and from there, walk to wherever we need to go, because we don't want to get lost in the rainforest. I knew where we were, and I knew the way to the coast, and told the researcher, let's get going this way. This is where things get weird. His device was saying the coast was the completely different direction from where I knew the direction to the coast was. Now I've heard stories when people go hunting about losing their minds and going straight into the rainforest and never coming back out. At that point I had to question my own brain, because what his device was saying was completely different to what I knew. But I knew in that moment that it may be his device playing up, and I didn't want to take the risk of disappearing into the rainforest because of it. I had walked this forest thousands of times, so decided to trust my gut. I told the researcher I thought his device was incorrect. He did not like the sound of that at all and tried to argue with me, saying that I was wrong. I knew something was wrong, and so I didn't want to spend my time arguing and wanted to get out of their area ASAP. So I basically told him, I'm going the way I know to get to the coast. You can follow your device if you want, but I'm not following you because you're wrong. We may die. Long story short, I followed the direction I knew and lo and behold, we made it to the coast. Thing is, if we'd have followed his device, we would have ended up in the densest part of the island where people are known to have gone missing. When we made it back to the eco lodge, he apologized and checked his device to see if it was broken. But lo and behold, turns out it was working perfectly again.
In the year 2001, movie theaters across the country were terrified by the demonic evil of the antagonists in Jeepers Creepers. The movie is the story of a brother-sister duo whose road trip is turned into a living nightmare by an immortal creature who hungers for their body parts. It's certainly a fantastical tale, but you may be surprised to learn that one of the movie's most terrifying scenes is actually very much based on reality. More than a decade prior to the release of the film, a woman named Marilyn Depew was reported missing on Easter Sunday of 1990. Marilyn's neighbors strongly suspected that her husband Dennis was responsible for the disappearance, as it was common knowledge around the neighborhood that the Depews had something of a rocky marriage. Many gossiped that Dennis had violently snapped when Marilyn finally professed a desire to end what had been a miserable marriage. The reality wasn't far off. After severely beating her in front of their 3 children, Dennis Depew lied to them, telling them that he was going to take their mother to the hospital. Instead, Dennis drove the dazed and bloodied Marilyn out into the woods and shot her in the back of the head. Since he was on some pretty isolated Michigan back roads while he was dumping his wife's body, Dennis Depew assumed that he would be undisturbed. It was rare to find any vehicle at all driving down that stretch of road, but as fortune would have it, a married couple by the name of Ray and Marie Thornton were headed Dennis's way. They slowed as they saw an abandoned schoolhouse at the roadside, just in time to catch a glimpse of Dennis Depew, holding a horribly familiar shape wrapped in a bloody off-white sheet. Horrified by what they'd seen, the couple raced down the dirt road only to find that a man who had evidently killed once before was now pursuing them at breakneck speed. The ensuing car chase between Dennis and the Thornton couple will seem eerily familiar to anyone who has watched Jeepers Creepers, since this confrontation is essentially reenacted during the first portion of the movie. Even the build-up to the horrifying discovery is almost identical as, much like the movie's protagonists, the Thorntons also happen to be playing the license plate game. Although director Victor Salva never cited the Depew murder as inspiration, it's rather hard to imagine that he wasn't influenced by it in some way. After failing to catch up with the Thorntons, Dennis Pugh then hid the truck he'd used to chase them, and for a good long while, there was no concrete leads on who killed the woman whose body was found behind that old abandoned church. Then one night, many months later, Dennis sat down to watch an episode of Unsolved Mysteries to find that the focus of that night's feature sounded strangely familiar. The show's narrator detailed a murder that had taken place in rural Michigan, and it also featured the testimony of a young married couple who had been chased down a stretch of highway after having witnessed the disposal of a corpse. The realization hit Dennis like a ton of bricks. They were talking about him and his wife, and by that point he was officially the case's primary suspect. He panicked, jumped into his new truck, and fled to the safety of a hideout in Texas, where he lived for 11 months under an assumed name. But after Hank Queen was discovered to be none other than Dennis Depew, and members of the public contacted law enforcement, it was Dennis's turn to be chased down a lonely stretch of highway, but this time, it was the police that were in hot pursuit. The lengthy chase ended in the state of Mississippi, where Dennis got out of his vehicle, put a pistol to his temple, and pulled the trigger. The footage from the episode of Unsolved Mysteries, the one that sent Dennis into a blind panic, can be found online, and it's fascinating to notice the obvious similarities between the movie and the real-world events. Yet something about the inclusion of an ancient demonic evil seems to take the sting out of the depicted events. We can watch a movie like Jeepers Creepers, then sleep soundly in our beds, safe in the apparent knowledge that it was only a movie. But the fact is, it isn't just a movie. For a good chunk of the film, the events are an exact recreation of a real-life event that almost ended in the brutal murders of a young Michigan couple by an unrepentant, bloodthirsty monster. A man who poses a much more tangible threat than any make-believe movie monster. I feel like I should preface this by making it clear that I'm not one of these paranormal-obsessed, ghost-hunting loons that think there's orbs in all their photos. And when I tell you that one of my favorite TV shows is Penn and Teller's BS, where they debunk all those nonsense conspiracy theories and whatnot, I think you get an idea of what kind of person I am. And for years, I went around thinking that science and logic could account for everything, with the only restrictions being the limits of our own knowledge. That was until something happened to me that I genuinely can't explain, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with any legitimate explanation. The whole thing freaked me out so much that it kicked off a kind of hyperfixation in me that lasted for months on end, to the point that my rational skeptic friends started to think that I was losing my mind. But I haven't lost my mind. It actually happened, and as much as people try to tell me that it was nothing but my mind playing tricks on me, I know what I saw, and it just about put the fear of God into me. We're going back to early spring of 2017 here, the time of the year when it's still getting dark fairly early here in the Northeast. It's around 9 p.m. and I'm driving back to Narragansett from my buddy's place in Newport, when I decide to take a shortcut through Saunderston. It's a drive I'd done like 100 times by that point. I felt like I could do it with my eyes closed at a push. But maybe that's what made me so complacent. A self-assured cockiness that's gotten me into trouble on more than one occasion, because about halfway into the journey, I must have switched off and taken a wrong turn. Next thing I know, I'm having to turn into a residential cul-de-sac to make a complete 180, and I'm so embarrassingly lost that I find myself reaching for my phone to check Google Maps. I check my position, mentally make a note of the turns I have to make to get back onto the highway, then start turning off the street as I put my phone away. When bam, there's a car in front of me. I slam on the brakes, let out a string of curse words, and prepare myself for, at the very best, a few scolding honks of their horn. I then start mouthing apologies at the driver, taking my hands off the wheel and being like, "Dude, I'm so sorry. My fault. My bad." When I noticed something really unusual about the car they're driving. It was a legit classic car. And don't go thinking 70s Camaro or something. This thing was a Buick, like one from the 30s or 40s or something. The kind of car you'd expect to see Al Capone climbing out of in Prohibition-era Chicago. And it was crisp, too. The guy must have sunk some serious cash into that thing because pretty much everything looked brand new. I suddenly realized that while I'm checking this guy's old car out, I'm actually still blocking him in. So I start backing up after giving him a nice car kind of thumbs up after pointing to his hood. The guy doesn't react though, at all. The whole time he's just smiling at me through his windshield. And as I start backing up to let him pass, I remember how he almost looked like one of those old ventriloquist dummies. Something about his hair or how waxy and pale he seemed to just trigger the association. Then, right as I'm about to give him enough space, my car just shuts off. The engine, the battery, everything. I jiggle the keys around, kind of frantically by that point, because I figured I'm making a total idiot of myself in front of the dude with the cool vintage car, but nothing happens. Lights won't turn on, engine won't fire. My first thought is, God, of all the times for my battery to die, why now? My car was a piece of garbage back then, making it disappointing, but not a total surprise. But I'm still blocking in Buick guy, who's surely getting mightily angry after sitting there for a solid few minutes. So I roll my window down, lean out a little, and start yelling over to the guy's car that he has to go around. But he doesn't respond. And all I can hear is this creepy old music coming from his car. I can't see a thing of him because of high headlights. He's not saying a thing, and That freaking song is making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Now this is the part that really freaks me out to recall. As the situation with the guy is turning into something of a standoff, I'm sitting there in the driver's seat wondering why the guy isn't talking, moving, or doing much of anything for that matter. I don't want to honk at the guy. Everything had basically been amicable so far, so I'm just sort of sitting there, waiting, getting more and more anxious as I do so. That's when the lights on my dash start flickering a little, and I think my battery might be coming back on. I don't know much about cars, but I'll take it. So I get all excited thinking I'm going to be getting away from what had been an incredibly awkward situation. I start jiggling my keys in the ignition again, but again, nothing happens. Right until my car radio bursts into life and starts playing the exact same creepy song as the one playing in the other car. It didn't have any lyrics. It was this creepy tritone loop with something playing over it. But somehow it managed to fill me with this feeling of dread as I realized something seriously weird was going on. The whole time I'm basically being blinded by the Buick's headlights while it just sits there. Then suddenly, the thing's headlights cut out, right at the same time my radio does, and I'm plunged into darkness again with my natural night vision having been totally ruined for a few seconds. While I'm half blinded, I try the ignition once again, and I breathe a huge sigh of relief when my car comes back to life again. But that little moment was severely short-lived because, as my own headlights turn on, the old Buick is nowhere to be seen. It came as such a shock that I actually screamed out loud, spinning around in my seat like I might catch a glimpse of it driving away. But no, there's absolutely no sign of that Buick anywhere. It was like it had just straight up vanished into thin air. You think with a big old engine like that, I'd have heard it driving past me, even if I was distracted by other things. And the time between the headlights cutting out and me getting my car running again couldn't be anything over 30 seconds. It would have had to zoom past me to disappear from my view so quickly. Have you ever felt super stoned and you don't even smoke? That's what it felt like. I'm putting the entire thing on myself, trying to explain it away as like a mini stroke or something, and it even occurred to me that my buddy back in Newport might have dosed me with something groovy, so to speak. But no, sober as a judge the whole time. And you can bet I didn't drink anything because those Rhode Island state troopers just love hunting DUIs. So like I said, because I couldn't find any way to explain what happened, it kicked off something of a hyperfixation in me. I revisited the cul-de-sac where it happened, looked up potential classic car owners in the Narragansett area, and researched medical papers on blackouts and time loss. The latter had me convinced that I was suffering from syncopal attacks, basically when your heart doesn't pump enough oxygen to the brain, a pretty serious condition, so, as you can imagine, I was only too willing to pony up for a medical checkup. Doctor listens to my heartbeat and checks my blood pressure, then, without any further examination, declares there's nothing wrong with my heart. He did say that the blackouts can be caused by stress, but at the time, I wasn't particularly stressed about anything, so I ruled that out as an explanation. One point, I went far out and ended up researching those UFO encounters where people experience time loss, but I figured I'd gone far too down a weird rabbit hole with that one. But as for the thing that people really pick up on with my story for some reason, is the fact that I did actually have a bit of luck when it came to my classic car search. There was a guy out in Middleton who had been trying to sell a 1937 Buick Special for years. The thing was a wreck, but he figured it might catch the eye of some vintage car enthusiasts who'd find the time to fix the old beauty up. I played it off like I was interested in making a purchase and still feel guilty about how excited he got, and he got his nephew to text me over some pictures of the old thing so I could take a good look at it. I'm not saying it was the same model or shape as the one I saw in that cul-de-sac, but I'm not gonna lie, it looked pretty similar. But it's an absolute impossibility that it's the same car, right? A coincidence, if ever there was one. Yet some of the people I talk to about this will always point out the connection and tell me I should have asked where he'd gotten it, if the old thing had been involved in a murder or a hit and run. Truth is, the guy didn't know. He said his dad picked it up at a police auction and died before he could get a chance to fix it up. And obviously, anything he knew about the car was buried with him. I suppose I've rambled on enough about this now, and I've already made my point that I can't explain what happened to me that night without sounding like a complete fruitcake. So, I guess I'll just do what I always do, and leave it up to you guys to decide what it was. But please, don't tell me ghost car or whatever, because I've been hearing that nonsense for like 4 years now, and I'm sick to death of hearing it. And besides, hypothetically, I did believe in ghosts. I think it would mess me up pretty bad to think that I got so close to one, but still drove away, unscathed.